Are you an adventurer looking to take your hunt to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the East Meets West Hunt podcast, Mountain Buck Q&A edition, brought to you by Timber Ninja Outdoors. The way that these episodes work are that they aren't just like your normal episode where I have a guest on and we talk for a couple hours about various topics. This is very detailed, very specific, based on the questions that you have in roughly a 10 to 20 minute window, and me answering it to the best of my abilities based on my experiences. So if you have any questions that you would like to submit, please send them in via email to beau@eastmeetswesthunt.com or via YouTube. So underneath one of these episodes, put it in the comments what your questions are. I take them all in and go through them and answer some of these questions on here. If you have, well, I guess I should say I was planning on stopping doing these Q&As here. This would have been the last one in November, but then I've been getting such good feedback on it from all of you, liking the shorter episodes that are bite-sized. You can get them while you're driving to work or doing whatever. So I'm gonna continue to do them through December here, probably not through the winter months. Nonetheless, let's dive right into this one. So the question that I have, this was a couple of different questions that I combined into kind of one answer here. It was a very general one about how do you hunt the big woods after the rut? So after the rut's done, and in most states you're kind of getting into gun seasons and everything, and in Pennsylvania, right as this is coming out tomorrow, Saturday, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, gun season's opening. And there's also other states that are similar, not just Pennsylvania, to that. And then that was the other questions that were surrounding gun season and tactics there. So I'm combining that into one and talking about here. So I wrote down some notes and some things that I think may help you out a little bit, because I'm in this situation where in Pennsylvania, I'll be carrying a gun here, and this is how I'm going to approach it. So, the rut is one of those times a year when I believe you have the best chance of filling your tag when you're hunting in the big woods. Well, sometimes it just doesn't work out and you're not able to fill your tag in that time period. So you're going to have to break out the gun and get out in the woods with the Orange Army. And, I used to think of that time of year as a time when you really didn't have any chance of killing a mature buck other than by accident or by luck. But I've kind of changed my thought process over the years on this and think I'm wrong and had to look at it from a different perspective to be able to find success. And really it comes down to hunting pressure. So this is going to change depending on where you're at in the country, what state, what type of land you're hunting, all these different things. But growing up in Pennsylvania, gun season opens right after Thanksgiving. And we always joked about you have to throw everything out the window that and just go sit in the woods and someone will push a deer by you. But when you started looking at it, I started running trail cameras longer, and I started leaving them out all year, even though that there's usually I'm going to have a few that are missing by leaving them up through gun season. I really feel like I get a lot of valuable information on it. And what I found was there's a few places that I would get multiple, almost like bachelor groups of bucks and does that would hide out during these gun seasons. And one of these particular places was a place where it was like a side hill. It's pretty steep, thick, old, like 25, 30-year-old clear cut pole stand. And right on the edge of it, there was a scrape, and I had a camera on video there on opening day of gun season. This 7 or 8-year-old deer, really big, mature deer. He actually didn't have the biggest rack in the world, but it was an old deer. He was working the scrape, and the audio on my Exodus camera can pick up gunshots in the background, so you could hear him off in the distance. But anyways, I found that there's a couple different places that these deer tend to hole up, and I'm gonna throw opening day out the window because that kind of changes everything. But just in the majority in this late season, they'll find places where if it's highly pressured, where there's cover and they're not being bothered. And that could be far away from the roads, back in a steep, thick draw or on a side hill, or that could be even next to a road down over a bank. So a lot of the roads that you see on public, whether they're on the top, the side hill, the bottom, there's voids in there. And a lot of people are parking at areas that are dead-end roads, gates, anything where they have an easy path to head out into the woods. When I say an easy path, it doesn't mean that everybody is generally lazy, but it just almost funnels the movement of people to those places. So when you're e-scouting, you're looking at Spartan Forge, go and mark some of those areas where you think the hunting pressure is going to come from and start drawing circles around it. Even just, a half mile would be good, but you could even do less. And you start to find these voids in the land of where they could be at. And then if it's open woods in those voids, well, they're probably not going to be there, but trying to find areas that have cover and security is going to be, in my opinion, the most important factor during this time of year. And also, when I looked at the Penn State Deer Forest blog, I've had Dwayne Diefenbach on here before, probably 3 or 4 years ago now, and their GPS collared studies during gun season, they don't move a whole lot, but they still do move in daylight within these small areas. So finding those areas can be really helpful during that time. So, but one of the tactics that I tend to use during gun season, and I will not use this on opening day because I don't want to be pushing deer around to other hunters, but it's still hunting. So being on the ground with a rifle or whatever type of firearm you have, you could use a bow too, but I think this is more suited for gun hunting. Moving slowly through the woods, hoping to catch a deer feeding, traveling, or bedded down in some of these places. So what I'll do is I'll look at the map ahead of time and kind of plan a route based on what the wind direction is going to be and plan like this is what I'm going to do for the day. And still hunting is, when you're walking through the woods, it's always this constant battle of, am I going too fast or am I going too slow? How do I, effectively cover this land? And my rule of thumb is places where I think that are kind of open and I don't expect deer just to be wandering around in daylight, I'm going to move through there relatively quickly. And then once I get to areas where I would think deer might be bedding at or some thicker cover, I'm going to move slower and deliberately through there. Even sometimes walking just a couple feet, taking a couple steps, glassing around, looking, trying to find a deer in some of these places. And if you think about it, it goes just like you would out west. So when you're glassing out west, most things in the wild go up. They go vertically. Well, a deer's body and every aspect of them goes horizontally. So you're looking for some of that horizontal movement. You're not always looking for antlers. You're not looking for the whole deer. You're looking for movement and differences in that environment, especially you're looking into a clear cut with briars and all this stuff. That can be hard to do, but going slow in those places and looking has been the best aspect for me. I remember, I think it was 2018, I was gun hunting and I was sneaking around these ridges. It was on a Saturday and I'd found this spot that I stole the term from THP, but I call it the buck nest. And I told this story on the podcast back in 2018, but where I was sneaking around and this area, I knew that people were driving to clear cuts on this side of the road. And then there was a valley and a creek bottom. And then there was this little shallow valley that came up and it was like 2.25 miles or so away from any road. And there was some blowdowns in there, and the bucks were using it in the early season, so I kind of came back to look at it, and I went through and caught some movement, and I might be messing up the details a little bit on this story, but I thought I remembered that there was a buck kind of bumping a doe around in there, and there was some movement, and I dumped a bleak cam, and this buck came up, and I ended up shooting him frontal at about 70 yards, coming up out of that just on the first bench. So that was an area where we're talking about still hunting, working through the ridges. And the nice thing about still hunting is, when you have this plan to go through it, I like to have a plan because it gives me a direction of travel, an idea. But as the wind changes and shifts, you're going to have to adapt on the fly. So having milkweed that you can drop as you're going will help you change your movement and understand how to flow through there. Another tactic is tracking. So we haven't had a lot of years in the last 10 really where we've had really good tracking snow in Pennsylvania, but I know a lot of the Northeast has that. I've done multiple podcasts on this. I'm trying to remember the episode number last year. But there was one from December of last year that you can listen to, where my buddy up in Maine had killed 170-inch deer tracking. Go check that one out. It's a really good one where he talks a lot about, how to read the tracks going through. And I've also had Hal Blood on, which is he's world renowned for tracking bucks. So I've had him on the podcast in the past. So refer to those for a lot more details on specific tracking. But, tracking, you're typically moving a little bit faster through, until you find a track than you would if you're still hunting. But or even driving roads and forest roads and looking for a track that crosses that road is another tactic some of those guys use. But like I said, for more details on that, I'd refer back to those episodes there. And then the last tactic is wind bumping. So wind bumping is a strategy that's similar to an old-fashioned deer drive. If you watch the Seek One video we did last year, we were doing old-fashioned deer drives here in PA where you get a few people coming from one direction, pushing out some sort of a thicket with posters or sitters sitting on the other side, hoping that the deer run past them and be able to get a shot. Well, wind bumping, you really only need two people to be able to implement wind bumping. So if you have like a point of a ridge or an area where you think a buck might be holing up, you get on the downwind side or wherever you think that is a good possible escape route, and you have someone sitting, and then you have another person coming from the upwind side and just kind of slowly moving through there, just trying to get that deer up from catching their wind. And not so they're full on sprinting like you might see in a deer drive, but they might just get up, look behind them, kind of skirt out a little bit, and then try to circle around them. And you want to be in that spot where you can have an opportunity at them. So in December of 2020, while I was hunting with my dad and Johnny Stewart, we wind bumped this steep slope. So Johnny and I were sitting, and my dad was the one that was doing the wind bumping, and he had wind bumped this. There was a steep slope of a point with some hemlocks on there. I got right on the edge of the hemlocks about partway down the hill. I was about halfway down the hill on just a little tiny bench that was there. But I got really close to that thick cover because I wouldn't think, from a wind bump, a buck's going to come out and sprint across that wide open oak side hill. And, and Johnny was up above a little bit higher on the first bench down. What that buck did was he came out, he just snuck out of that cover and was looking behind him. And I was right there at sub 20 yards to be able to shoot him. So it was pretty awesome. And that was an 8.5-year-old deer. It's actually over my shoulder, but I don't believe that he is in the camera frame right now. But it's a really good tactic that you can use if you have a buddy or something to be able to go out there and utilize that with gun hunting. And you look at deer drives, and I've heard it so many times, but there's no strategy to deer drives, just pushing deer out. Yeah, and if you have whatever the maximum is a roster in Pennsylvania to be able to go and push places out. Yeah, there's not as much of a chance for a deer to escape then. But when you're doing these smaller drives, and I have no problem with the bigger groups either. I mean, it's whatever you want to be able to do. But with the smaller groups, it really takes some strategy on what the wind is doing. How do you think that the deer are going to use the terrain and vegetation to escape, and putting a plan together and being strategic about it to be able to make it happen. And honestly, I love that aspect of it and like doing those types of drives with family and friends. It's just, it's a good time after sitting in a tree by yourself during archery season. But anyways, that's my answers to that question. Just 3 different kind of strategies there on how I'm looking at this gun season and hunting these deer after the rut, using that historical data from trail cams of where these deer have been hanging out, and looking at that GPS collar data, kind of figuring out places that these deer like to be at, and then either using still hunting, tracking, or some wind bumps. So with that being said, good luck to everyone. Stay safe, and we will talk to you next week.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.